What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the Brant Partial Show. So I wanted to start talking about the Oregon Ducks, and I wanted to start with a quote that Dan Lanning said about Oregon. He said, "Good is the enemy of great." So I think that's the perfect message to this Oregon. I think that represents this Oregon team because this is an Oregon team that's good. You know they're going to be a good football team. I'm going to say this. I don't think they're going to win the Pac-12 this year, but this is a team that is going to be good, but just how can they take the next step and become great? Can they become elite? I think that's a big question for Oregon. But Oregon, like USC, like a lot of top schools, I'm touching on USC here, they did a really good job in the transfer portal. Justin Jacobs, talented guy they got at linebacker from transfer from Iowa. Brandon Dorlus at defensive end, a guy that's been there. Kyrie Jackson, a cornerback transfer from Alabama, a guy that shows ability to read plays, good in zone coverage, shows some acceleration and bursts, cover man-to-man downfield. So, yeah, did a good job of – Oregon's got a pretty good – they've done a good job in the transfer portal this year and last year, bringing in Bo Nix. You know, when they brought in Bo Nix, I've touched on this before. I didn't think Bo Nix was going to be like super. I didn't think Bo Nix would have the season he had. Bo Nix was really good this year, and you saw him get better and better as the season went on. You thought after the way he played against Georgia and the team as a whole, you kind of wrote off the Oregon Ducks overall, but they just kept getting better and better. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, Justin Jacobs, be interesting to see how this guy does show the ability to get off blocks, shows the ability he can pursue ball carriers. So I think Oregon to me just does not have enough star power on the defensive side of the ball to win the Pac-12. I think they're going to be a really solid defense overall. I like the running back Bucky Irvin. He's a good player. Offensive line should be solid once again. Receiving core I do like. Tez Johnson, Troy Franklin, and then Tez Johnson, both talented guys. Tez Johnson, a guy that he shows he shows explosiveness as a receiver. You saw in the spring game, the 60-yard touchdown. So I think Tez Johnson is going to have some big, explosive receiving touchdowns this year. Troy Franklin, just a good all-around receiver who's got an NFL skill set. So I think offense for Oregon is going to be really good. I think defense holds them back a little bit just because they're missing some star power. I think even though they're going to be really solid defensively, I don't think they have enough difference makers to make enough big-time plays in big-time games. So that's where I'm kind of at with the Oregon Ducks. I think Bo Nix, excellent play on offense, or excellent play at quarterback. Should be a strong running game led by Bucky Irving at running back, and then the receiving core strong. So. Yeah, offense definitely has firepower, difference makers, but yeah, defensively, they are just kind of searching a little bit. They're hoping one of these transfers pops, but based on what I've seen, I think a lot of them are going to be good players, but really not necessarily great players. So yeah, I think that's what Dan Lanning. I think Dan Lanning, I don't want to say he's hoping, but I think that he is kind of in the back of his mind, he understands that, yeah, we're good right now, but we've got to keep building to be great. And a lot of that is they're going to have to keep bringing in more and more talented players like they're starting to do in recruiting. They're going to have to bring in more talented recruits. They're going to have to keep doing their work and due diligence in the transfer portal if they do want to win the Pac-12 and take that next step of becoming a national title contender. But they're not there as of yet. I think this is an Oregon team that's probably a year away, So some of these incoming freshmen, I didn't watch a whole lot of them, but the athlete they brought in, what's his name? I have it here. Jirion Ducky. This is a guy that he shows a lot of ability. Where he's going to play is a question mark. Do they put him at receiver? Do they move him to defensive back, corner, safety? I think he's got the ability to probably, with his athleticism, I think he could play either one. But yeah, does this guy make an impact for him? Do we see any of these young, incoming, talented freshmen emerge? But yeah, Oregon. Likely a team that's a year or two away from being a legit national title contender, and probably a year away from being a Pac-12 title contender. Now you can't. I've kind of made this point, but I'm going to hammer it home. I think Oregon with Bo Nix, I think anything is possible, or I think they still are a Pac-12 contender this year, just with a guy like Bo Nix at quarterback. When you have an elite quarterback, that really can cover up a lot of holes on your team. But yeah, I think Oregon probably is going to be in more of a prime position to make some noise nationally next year. So even with Bo Nix gone, I think that Dan Lanning's a guy that knows how to recruit. He knows how to bring in talent. So to me, Oregon, and it looks like Lanning is looking to bring in talent more so in recruiting as opposed to transfer portal. So with that being said, that usually means that it's gonna be a couple more years till we see some of these younger recruits really take off. Even as talented as some of them are, it still take them maybe a year or two for you to really see their high-end potential and what they can do overall. But yeah, well, the way the schedule, I'll touch on this. The way the schedule sets up, Oregon could start 5-0. Texas Tech week 2 could be tricky. But yeah, they play their first 5 games certainly are winnable before they play Washington October 14th, which will be certainly a key game for them. All right, so let's talk USC. Man, USC, there was a guy that was commenting on this chat. I'm going to have to say he's right. The more I've dove into USC, the more I've really continued to garner more respect for Lincoln Riley. They know what they are doing as far as talent evaluation. They are bringing in transfers who have some high-end traits. And there's a few guys I want to touch on, but Bear Alexander, too, if you remember. Big-time recruit, went to Georgia. This is a guy who has a lot of good abilities, a very good athlete for a guy that's that big, moves exceptionally well, has some power, especially in the hands and the upper body, explosive when he at the point of attack, as far as when he engages offensive linemen. So Bear Alexander, a guy I really like. Christian Roland Wallace, another guy transferred from Arizona. Boy, they have really done a good job of talk about stealing players from Arizona. Christian Roland Wallace, their corner. This is a guy who I don't understand how he was a 3-star coming out of high school. You see how, as much as some of the recruiting services are dead on, you see the guys like this, I think, are what are going to make a difference, or what could potentially make the rich get richer. Because this is a guy that you see, he's got all the traits and movement skills that there's no reason he should be a 3-star recruit. But all this guy's done is ball out in high school and then show a lot of ability at Arizona. I can't remember if he was a California native or not, but this is a guy that, it's bigger schools. I say bigger schools, Arizona, Power 5 school, but the point I'm trying to make is Alabama, Georgia, some of the other schools should have been knocking on this kid's door in high school. But this is a guy who, ball skills are there, big hitter, understands, burst, acceleration, knows how to take angles, a good tackler. So this is a guy I think this is a guy that could be a true difference maker for USC. Him, Bear Alexander, Anthony Lucas, a guy that started his career at Texas A&M, was a big-time recruit. He's got strong hands, can win with speed. So yeah, USC not only they've done a tremendous job of getting guys on the defensive line, which that's what's key for USC. Can they improve the trenches? And I'm going to answer that question. Yes, I was immediately wrong. I've done more research now. And another guy, Michael Tarquin, too, at left tackle, projected to start at left tackle. This is another guy that is not, even though he's been at Florida for a while, just missed some games because of injury. But yeah, this is a guy who's an excellent left tackle. I think he's got an NFL skill set. So to me, Lincoln Riley in this recruiting staff, has done a really good job of evaluating talent, and they are on to something here for sure. They are bringing in guys. They are doing just what the doctor ordered. They're bringing in guys that are outstanding players in the trenches, and that's where USC is going to have to improve to win games down the road if they want to be a national title contender, not just a Pac-12 title contender. But yeah, USC is my pick to win the Pac-12. And another guy, so I'm watching Mason Cobb too at linebacker. Mason Cobb, this is a guy who, I have no idea why he's not getting more hype as one of the top linebackers that's eligible for next year's draft. it just goes to show that there's so many guys. This is kind of a side note here. There's so many guys like this time of year that, could move their way into one of the top guys for next year's draft that people aren't talking about. Mason Cobb certainly is an example of that. You watch his movement skills, another guy that, to me, mind-blowing why he wasn't a higher-ranked recruit. Movement skills, so good at reading quarterbacks and zone coverage. Reads plays and just takes angles with violence. Just can bring big hits. So excellent job of working through the mess and traffic. Side-to-side movement is excellent. So, yeah, Mason Cobb, this guy is going to be an absolute stud. And then they still have some depth, too. You still got a guy like Shane Lee. Shane Lee, guy that really has not really developed into the linebacker we thought. Former, big-time recruit coming out of high school, played at Alabama, but now you got some depth at linebacker and some high-end talent, so I absolutely love that move, getting Mason Cobb. Mason Cobb, this is a guy that really is exciting. Jamil Muhammad, too. Interesting story. Muhammad was a guy that at Georgia State started off as a quarterback. Was a big-time quarterback in high school, but kind of one of those guys that an athlete, such a superior athlete, the quarterback wasn't his prime position, but they wanted him to put him at quarterback to have the ball in his hand. Goes to Georgia State as a 3-star recruit. Midway for the 2020 season, they move him to defense, and all he does is take off defensively. Couple seasons, 2021 and 2022 at Georgia State, 11 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks. Shows a lot of ability as a rush linebacker. So, yeah, with all that being said, USC is in a prime position. They have high-end difference makers on the trenches. Overall, at quarterback, Caleb Williams, and they have talent at receiver, NFL talent. Dorian Singer, too, another transfer they got. So with all that being said, I guess the one question mark a little bit at running back, and then still some questions in maybe the depth overall in the defensive backfield, but a guy like Kalen Bullock is a solid player. I think maybe he's a little bit overhyped, but he's a guy that's got some ability. So, yeah, USC strength did exactly what they needed in the transfer portal. Not only did they get good players in the trenches, they got high-end difference makers, and then difference maker at linebacker, a guy that's a leader, experienced a lot of football, Mason Cobb. Talent at wide receiver. I think they do have enough depth at running back, even if there's not high-end talent there. And then a quarterback who's going to go likely number 1 in the draft. So with all that being said, USC is going to win the Pac-12 this year. Write it down. Lincoln Riley and their recruiting staff knows exactly what they're doing as far as bringing in high-end talent on this team. So USC will be the Pac-12 champions next year. Can't wait for when they play Washington, though. Washington's probably my second team now. I did have Washington to win it all or win the Pac-12 initially, but as I've kind of dove deep into USC's team and watched tape on guys that they land in the transfer portal and taken into mind some of the guys that they have and some of the guys that they already have, I think it's a perfect mix, and I think it's a perfect formula for them to win the Pac-12 this year and actually be a national title contender. I think USC, this is tough for me to say, but I think USC could be I think they are a national title contender. I think they still are. Even with all they've done, I think it's still going to be tough for them to compete with Georgia, even in LSU, Alabama, some of the SEC teams that are so superior in the trenches, but I think they certainly are going to have a shot to do so. But yeah, absolutely love what USC's done. I cannot wait till they play Washington. I think that's going to be a super fun game. A lot of talent on the field, 2 NFL level quarterbacks, and an elite edge rusher in Braylon Trice that Washington has, guy that I think, in my opinion, could go top 10, maybe the top linebacker. That's the thing. Is Mason Cobb the best linebacker? I think Barrett Carter's up there from Clemson, but is Mason Cobb the best linebacker in college football as far as, at least for draft eligible players? I think he's a guy that I think it's going to be a lot like Christian Gonzalez last year for Oregon. Christian Gonzalez was a guy who played some good football at Colorado, but then finally got a chance to really shine at a team like Oregon. I think Mason Cobb even though he's played so well for Oklahoma State, I think now when the lights are even brighter at USC, I think he's going to have a chance to really do some excellent things and have an outstanding year at linebacker for USC. And I think the flash plays, USC on TV more. If USC is really good like they should be, I think Mason Cobb is going to put himself in a position to be a high-end draft pick. And I think that it's kind of sad that as top-heavy as college football's been, that a guy has to go from Oklahoma State to USC or Colorado to Oregon. Colorado a little different now with Deion Sanders going to get more of the spotlight, but it's crazy that a guy has to make that jump to really get the spotlight. But yeah, it's interesting. USC has kind of done the opposite of Oregon. Oregon appears to be wanting to really turn around their roster via recruiting. USC, they've kind of almost had some, not necessarily misses, but Damani Jackson, Corey Foreman are examples of guys that, there's a lot of hype in high school, but you've kind of watched their tape. They may have been a little bit overrated. Now, they do have enough ability. Jackson and Foreman, some of those 5-star guys that USC has recruited, they do have enough ability to do some nice things and help contribute to this team, but I don't think they're not going to be as high-end level impact players as some of the guys they brought in the transfer portal. So yeah, I could go on talking about USC all day. I absolutely love what they've done. They'll win the Pac-12 this year. But yeah, we're going to kind of transition here and talk about Texas A&M. So Texas A&M, it's funny how these three teams kind of tie in as kind of polar opposites. Texas A&M kind of has taken the Oregon approach. We're going to win through recruiting. But they've kind of been like USC in the sense that it's funny how I'm kind of tying all three of these in. They've kind of been like USC in the sense that they have brought in some big-time recruits, but a lot of them probably should have been rated a little bit lower than they were. Like, I look at Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan kind of reminds me of Corey Foreman and some other guys that have been overrated at the defensive line. You watch their tape. I've noticed about 5-star defensive linemen. You watch their tape, and they make some eye-popping plays just because they're big. Their quickness off the ball, is normally the number one elite trait that guys have in high school that gets them rated a 5-star. But if you really watch Nolan's tape, he does not really win with power too often. I think that's kind of the key missing thing. If a guy can win with power, get into a guy, control him, drive him back. If he can win with power and speed is key. That's the thing. Nolan and some of these guys that are 5-star guys that have been a little bit overrated coming out of high school, a lot of it is just beating a man with quickness, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Quickness off the ball, the burst to beat a guy off the line of scrimmage is great. But the thing is, in the high school level, that high-end level trait you can get away with. In the college level, you have to have some more. You have to show more of the hand usage, technique, leverage. You have to have high-end level traits in those other aspects as well. That'll really separate you in college. And I noticed that some of the guys, it's hard. That's what's hard to evaluate high school guys sometimes, especially defensive linemen, because you see them just winning off the edge of speed, which is great. They'll be able to do that in college, but offensive linemen are quicker, more athletic. You're not just going to be able to. That speed is not as much of a threat if you can't combine it with the power element. So I think Walter Nolan, not to take too much away from him, I think he could be a good player, but he's kind of been one of the guys that's been a little bit overrated. That's the thing. Texas A&M. I used to have this term with Michigan and Brady Hoke. It's kind of like they're kind of blindly recruiting. And I know that some of their boosters are paying big money for guys, but you can't just go to 24/7 and go, oh, who are the top guys? We'll just throw money at them. You have to really, like USC, you have to have guys that know how to evaluate not only just the traits that really stand out. You have to kind of evaluate all the traits in totality and kind of look at some of the more nuances to the guy's game. The hand usage, block shedding, ability to convert speed to power. Some of the other traits you have to look at, and not just quickness off the ball. Because that's the thing about some of the guys, not just with guys Texas A&M have landed. Some guys do have that elite quickness off the ball, but you can't just, like I said, you can't just win that way completely in college. But yeah, Evan Stewart. Speaking of guys they did hit on, Evan Stewart does have an NFL skill set receiver, this guy that's been impactful, so they're going to need him to play really well this year. I look at Texas A&M, and it's not all just underachieving players based on where they're recruiting. You look at a guy like Bryce Foster, too. He's one of the more talented centers in college football. To me, I guess in summary with Texas A&M, this is the way I feel. I could be wrong here. To me, this has the makings of a good team, an 8-9 win team, but I don't think they'll be competitive as far as winning the division. But the question for Texas A&M fans and the question for Texas A&M, the question for the people affiliated with Texas A&M, like their athletic director and the people that make the decision about Jimbo. I don't want to say they're going to fire Jimbo Fisher, but is 8-9 wins good enough? Because that's what this team feels like. I feel you get the feel this team is going to win some more games, but they're just not. There's not enough. They just have not done enough in the transfer portal and some of the incoming recruiting class to really make some noise and win the SEC this year. I know they've brought in some, they had another nice recruiting class. You look at a guy like DJ Hicks, 11th overall player, a guy who flashes some ability. I think he might be ranked too high, and then you look at a guy like Reuben Owens. Kind of the red flag for me on some of these recruits to say if they're overrated. Alabama and Georgia doesn't recruit them. And you say, well, Alabama and Georgia can't recruit everyone. Yes, that's true. But also, they can recognize, all the success they've had, they can recognize all the all-around traits a guy has and whether he can project to be a really good player and an NFL caliber guy and a true difference maker. You look at a guy like Reuben Owens, who not heavily recruited by some of the other big-time schools. You look at he is a guy who, you immediately watch on tape. The speed is very good. I mean, this guy explosion burst, but, change of direction, the power element, break tackle, some of that is kind of missing from his game. He is a little bit of a straight liner, a guy that just needs, almost perfect blocking in a big hole to really get off to the races. Certainly, Reuben Owens certainly would be a guy who, when a play's blocked perfectly, is he going to be a problem in the open field? Is it going to turn into, can he just, blow by people even with angles? Absolutely. But as far as change of direction, power, strength, and ability to get extra yards and move the pile forward, I think that some of that, you don't really see that full element in his game. So, I don't want to make this Texas A&M is completely overrated and everything they've done, like recruiting and each season. I think Jimbo Fisher's a good coach, but looking back on it, it might be the Florida. Jimbo Fisher might just be a good coach who everything kind of came together with Florida State. I've touched on this. It's like the perfect example, Gene Chizik, 2010 at Auburn. Now, Gene Chizik won a national title at Auburn, but all things kind of came into place. Cam Newton, you had NFL difference makers, and who was the defensive lineman they had? Remember, he actually played for my Detroit Lions, Nick Fairley. So NFL difference makers, Cam Newton, magical season, all comes together. Maybe Jimbo Fisher was kind of the case of all things coming together. And maybe at Texas A&M we're kind of finding out who he really is. Maybe he's just a kind of an 8-9 win guy that can maybe have a big time year when all things come together and they have more NFL talent. But maybe he just kind of is that guy that's just going to be kind of consistently, good, but really, doesn't have is not really like a elite talent evaluator or necessarily an elite offensive mind or elite quarterback coach. Because that's the thing, Jimbo Fisher kind of has been labeled a lot of things. Before this past season, maybe people started to say maybe he is an elite recruiter, or maybe he is an elite quarterbacks coach, especially when Kellen Mond came out. Some people thought, the way he got Kellen Mond to play, maybe he is an elite quarterbacks coach, or the way Jameis Winston was playing, maybe he's an elite quarterback coach. And then you see, good, very good quarterbacks coach, good offensive mind, good play call. It's just a lot of good with Jimbo Fisher. But I think there has been times where he said maybe he can be elite. Especially after the 2014 season. I know they lost to Oregon, but I think there was people saying maybe Jimbo Fisher is an elite coach. And then you saw kind of, Florida State kind of went down a little bit, went to A&M, brought excitement right away. They were competitive right away. They've been good with the exception of last year. Last year they were below average. But yeah, Jimbo Fisher is a guy that's kind of, he's been scratching, he's been clawing, he's been kind of, clawing at they're knocking on the door of being elite, but he just has not been able to sustain it, with the exception of the 2013 season. I know 2020 they had a really nice year, but there was COVID. Still really weren't super competitive against Alabama. I know Alabama won it all, but if you want to talk about Texas A&M getting to elite, you got to measure them with an elite team, and they really weren't that close against Alabama. But yeah, Jimbo Fisher, not to take everything away from him, because I've actually been a Jimbo Fisher defender for a long time. I think he is a good football coach. I think he has a lot of there's a lot of good qualities about him. I think he's a guy that's been around the game for a long time, coached under Nick Saban at LSU. A guy that, I think he, understands leadership, understands, I think he can recognize good players. I think he knows how to value or knows how to put good players in a position. Like if you remember 2013, they brought in Jalen Ramsey, and he's like, Jalen Ramsey's such a superior talent, we had to get him on the field. He's a guy that never said anything about playing time, and so yeah, he recognizes, he knows how to use elite talent, but it looks like he's kind of put into question his ability to evaluate high-end five-star, high-end high school recruits and kind of differentiate which guys are maybe a little bit overrated and which guys who are still pretty good. But yeah, A&M, Tony Grimes too, a transfer corner. I think he'll be pretty solid. I wish they would have done more in the transfer portal, but still, I think I don't know. To me, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say, I don't know what their plan exactly was in the transfer portal. Obviously, I think they're confident, in a lot of guys they had, but they definitely could have been better in the transfer portal overall. Yeah, let's talk the preseason poll. So the preseason poll, number 10, Tennessee. So Tennessee's kind of, I'm kind of torn with Tennessee this year. Was last year kind of like, we talk about Texas A&M having the year in 2020. That was kind of the outlier year with Jimbo Fisher and A&M. Was last year kind of an outlier year for Josh Heupel in Tennessee, and they kind of go back to being, maybe they're still good, maybe a 7-8 win 9 team, but and last year was kind of the outlier year where you have an NFL level quarterback. You hit on some key transfer guys. Was last year the outlier year? Tennessee, to me, was one of the top 10 teams that I think maybe could really fall off. And then number 9, Clemson. So Clemson I was really high on, but then the more I kind of look at Clemson, the more I kind of go, yeah, the more I'm kind of just on the fence with Clemson. I think Peter Wood's the incoming freshman, talented player. I think he's got some ability, some high-end ability. I think he could be an elite difference maker, maybe a guy that's drafted number 1 defensive tackle off the board in a few years. But I think with Clemson, I think that this year is will be a lot more of the same as last year, where maybe it's they win the conference title, but they still drop a couple games, maybe a couple they shouldn't. So yeah, that's Clemson. I'm a little weary of. But yeah, I'm struggling with Clemson because, I think Cade Klubnik's a good player, but is he an elite? Is he an NFL elite difference maker at quarterback? I think Cade Klubnik. I think when his career's done, I think he'll go down as a good college quarterback, but I don't know if he has necessarily an elite skill set, because he's a guy who I think with his work ethic he's going to keep getting better and better and be a good college player. But to me, guys that are elite NFL quarterbacks, you see their ability right away. Caleb Williams, you saw his ability right away. Trevor Lawrence, you saw his ability right away. You knew that they had potential down the road to be an NFL top quarterback in the draft and a guy that could really become a game changer, not just in college football, but in the NFL. So I don't know if I see that with Klubnik, even though he has bulked up. He has improved, throws the ball a little bit better. I don't know if Cade Klubnik is a true NFL difference maker. And not that you can't win a national title with a good college quarterback. I think it really just puts a little bit of, it kind of lowers the ceiling for the team. It makes it so Clemson's going to have a better all-around team around him. And I think Clemson would have, for Clemson to win it this year with Cade Klubnik at quarterback, they would probably have to have the teams like they had in 2018. And it's not every year you have a team like that. Like I know, like Barrett Carter's an NFL caliber linebacker. I think Trotter is too. I'm trying to draw on a blank. I think Antonio Williams is an NFL receiver. I think they have enough difference makers to be really good, but I think to me, this is another year like last year. Clemson probably wins the ACC and but just does not. They drop a couple games that kind of hold them back from being a national title contender. And then the Florida State Seminoles. So Florida State, well, to me, kind of like USC, they've done more than I thought as far as bringing in high-end talent via the transfer portal. A guy like Braden Fisk is a really nice player from Western Michigan. Fabian Lovett, good defensive tackle. I think Jordan Travis is a guy like Klubnik, who I don't think he's an NFL-level quarterback, but a guy that seems to get better each year, and a guy that it seems like he just kind of is slowly figuring things out, like how to win, how to play in this offense. So Jordan Travis, good quarterback. I think talking true NFL, true difference makers, Jared Verse, certainly that guy with a question around Lovett and Fisk. I actually would say Fisk I'd put a question on Lovett. So two true difference makers defensively, experience at linebacker, an offensive line that I think should be improved, and then difference makers potentially, I would say one, maybe two. I would say two, Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. Or no, three, and Jaheim Bell. So difference makers at the receiving positions, at the skill position, and then also Trey Benson at running back. So, yeah, I mean, difference makers offensively. To me, Florida State's kind of in a position like Oregon. Difference makers on the offensive side of the ball. I know I've said that a couple times, but defensively, there is. Defensively, I think they're going to be solid overall. I just don't think, even with Jared Verse and Fisk, and even if Lovett takes another step, I think it is kind of a far cry that Lovett will be a difference maker. Even if Verse and Fisk are difference makers defensively, does the rest of the defense carry its weight, and the rest of the defense, can they improve just a little bit? I think even with that little improvement, and you combine the talent they have on offense, I don't think it is enough for Florida State to win a national title. Now, is it enough for them to win the ACC? Yes. I think Florida State is an ACC title contender, and like I've touched on, I think they do have enough high-end talent offensively to win to win the ACC and be a high, potent offense. But yeah, Florida State. Maybe with that, I am talking myself into Florida State being a national title contender. I think that, I feel kind of the same way about them as Oregon. I think they're a conference title contender, but a national title contender, maybe still a year or two away. Penn State at number 7. So I'll say that, I'll side note about this. I think this coach's poll is dead on. I think Penn State maybe could be lower, but Penn State is an interesting team. Talent at left tackle. I mean, Olu Fashanu is one of the best tackles in college football, probably the best tackle. I know he's got a skill set that a lot of NFL people really like. I'm not sure what the NFL scouts are saying about him, but the NFL draft media is really high on Olu Fashanu. I'm high on him. I wish he had a better anchor. I think his strength overall is good. It's maybe not elite, but his quickness off the snap, footwork, getting into excellent position is really good. So I think Penn State's going to be a really good team. I don't know. To me, they're just in a tough position with Michigan, Ohio State to win the Big Ten. So, but I guess the good thing for Penn State is if they can beat Michigan and or Ohio State and win the Big Ten, then they're likely just that good, and they likely are a legit national title contender. So Penn State going to be a really good team this year. Talent returning. Drew Aller at quarterback. He should have more upside than even what was the guy last? Sean Clifford. And then talent at running back, explosive talent. Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, really good players defensively. Have some talent defensively. Kalen King, one of the best corners in college football. So, I like Penn State. I don't necessarily love this roster. I think that there is difference makers on both sides of the ball, but I think kind of like with Florida State, you have difference makers on both sides of the ball, but does the rest of the guys outside of the difference makers, do they carry enough weight to make this a high-end level team overall? I think that's the question for Penn State, and we'll find out. And kind of like USC, I think they want to improve in the trenches, but I don't know if they did enough overall to dramatically improve in the trenches, kind of like USC. Number 6, USC, I touched on. USC, we talked a lot of USC earlier. But USC comes in at number 6, and I think that, a lot of people are like, is USC a national title contender? And the USC is the popular team to make the playoff for the first time since we switched to the playoff format. But I'm buying USC as a team that can make the playoff. I don't know. It's a different story whether they can compete with a team like Alabama in Georgia in the trenches for 4 quarters. But USC, as far as difference makers and improvement in the trenches, USC is a legit Pac-12 title contender. My pick to win the Pac-12. LSU comes in at number 5. So on my Bayou Bengals channel, I talk all LSU, and LSU, to me, with Mason Smith back on the defensive line, I think is critical for the LSU Tigers. I think that'll make a huge difference on this LSU defense. Harold Perkins is going to fly around, making plays, making tackles, going to save so much yardage over the course of a season with that ability. So, LSU is going to be a really, really good football team this year, and I think they're deep with their improvements defensively and just improvements overall. Year 2 under Brian Kelly, a lot of things just moving in the right direction for LSU. And to me, LSU is a team I'd like to bet on to win the national title, and they are the perfect contrarian pick outside of like Alabama, Georgia, the usual suspects, just because of all the things they've done in the transfer portal, all the good things Brian Kelly's done, the improvement at the end of last year, even though they lost a few games and they lost to Georgia, but the way they finished in that bowl game and the way they played at times, or played for the most part, upset win against Alabama, that's really got them believing. So a lot of reason to buy into LSU as a national title contender. So we'll see what happens. Number 4, Ohio State, and a lot of the reason people are believing in Ohio State is the NFL talent they have across their team. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. I think Tuimoloau maybe getting a little bit overhyped, but he is an athlete nonetheless. Tommy Eichenberg, one of the best linebackers in college football. So Ohio State, NFL guys, Denzel Ward at corner. Ohio State, can they beat Michigan is the main question this year. If they can beat Michigan this year, you got to feel like that win would they'd already, because going into Michigan, Ohio State, their talent is so superior to the Big Ten. You got to believe they're going to go into the Michigan game 10-1, 11-0 once again. So if they beat Michigan, Ohio State likely a shoe-in the Big Ten championship, and they should be a team that is a lock in the playoff. But can they compete with Georgia and Alabama? I'm going to say yes, just because all the NFL talent. They've lost some guys up front: Luke Whippler, DeJuan Jones, Paris Johnson. So you lose some key guys in the trenches. But Ohio State, I think they've done a good job of recruiting the O-line. I think, does the D-line continue to improve? You got guys like Michael Hall, Tyleik Williams. Do those guys take another step, especially a guy like Michael Hall? Does he take another step in his improvement? Ohio State. I do like this year. I just do, they're just, that is the burning question is can they beat Michigan? And if they do so, who would they match up? Is it Georgia, LSU, or Alabama? How would they match up with them once again? So those are the two main questions with LSU. Can they beat Michigan? And if they do have another matchup with a Georgia, Alabama, LSU, a team that's really good at the line of scrimmage from the SEC, how would they do? And what players take the next step in their development? Guys like Michael Hall, Tyleik Williams, Denzel Burke. So yeah, those are the three main questions I have for Ohio State. So, but even though I have questions for Ohio State, there is a lot of certainty that they are going to be a really good football team this year. Number 3, Alabama. So Alabama, the more you kind of look at Alabama this year, the more you kind of like them. They're kind of a little under the radar. I say under the radar, they do come in at number 3, but you got guys that kind of like Ohio State. You got NFL difference makers, Kool-Aid McKinstry, J.C. Latham. You look at Ja'Cory Brooks, a guy like at receiver. So you have guys like that, but who are guys that take the next step? Jahad Campbell at linebacker is a big-time recruit. Nick Saban was giving him high praise. Does he take another step in his development? So you look at a guy like that. Does he could be a key difference maker? Deontay Lawson at linebacker, a guy that played well for him last year. Who really takes another step on the D line? Tim Smith, a good player, but who is the game changer on the defensive line? And then Malachi Moore, a guy that's played pretty well for him. Does he continue to get better? Does he have do all things really come together for him this year? Flashed as a freshman back in 2020. So yeah, Alabama, there's a lot of things to like about this football team, but they're kind of like Ohio State. There's just a few question marks. There is enough uncertainty that really is the reason why they're I think that's the reason Alabama and Ohio State are 3 and 4, but just because they're going to be good, NFL talent, recruited well, good coaches, a lot of certainty, but just a few minor question marks. Then number 2, Michigan Wolverines. So as a Michigan football fan, I'll say this. I want to believe Michigan should be the number 2 ranked team. I want to believe that they can compete with a Georgia, Alabama, if they were to meet them in the first round or in the national championship. But I think Michigan is just still lagging a little bit at the line of scrimmage. And I say that they've been the Joel Moorhead winner for the best offensive line, but it seems like they just have, Michigan, with the exception of maybe this year is the exception. When they match up with a Georgia, Alabama, they do not have enough difference makers to kind of overcome that. It kind of reminds me of, if you look at Clemson, when Clemson beat Alabama with Deshaun Watson. Now, Alabama had the edge at the line of scrimmage, but Watson was such a superior difference maker in NFL talent, and they had NFL difference makers at the skill position. It can kind of overcome not winning the line of scrimmage. Michigan, to me, that's the question for Michigan. Do they have enough difference makers at the skill positions to overcome maybe being a little less talented at the line of scrimmage of a Georgia, Alabama, or LSU if they were to meet them in a playoff? That's the main question to me. Is J.J. McCarthy, does he take another step this year? And is he such an exceptional talent that they could overcome a game where they are not the superior team at the line of scrimmage? So that's the question for Michigan. And then they need some guys to kind of take the next step. Will Campbell, elite talent at corner, does he take the next step? The depth at corner, a little bit of a question. I know they brought in Josh Wallace from UMass. So, yeah, Michigan, there's high-end talent, but do they, they've proven that they're going to be really good, kind of like Ohio State, but can they take the next step here? And does this team truly go out and prove that this is Jim Harbaugh's best year? And does this team have the ability to be the exception team where it all comes together and they can win a national title? I think my answer would be no. I don't think Michigan can win a national title this year, but I'll say this. They do have all things in place to kind of be the exception outlier year. And this is likely, in my opinion, Harbaugh's most talented year, but they do have to go and prove it. Harbaugh suspended the first 4 games. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with Michigan. Number 1 team is the Georgia Bulldogs. So, Georgia, I guess simply put, there's no reason why I know you could argue Georgia's not the number one team, but there's no reason why Georgia shouldn't be the preseason number one team. They've won the national title back-to-back years. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but yeah, Georgia is still very talented, and they do actually quietly return a lot of guys that were very impactful from last year's team. Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey. They have talent at the line of scrimmage. Cedric Van Pran, maybe the best center and interior lineman in college football, one of the top draft eligible guys. You look at defensively strong linebacker core with experience, and guys like Dumas Johnson, Small Munden, a strong secondary in Malachi Starks, Javon Bullard, a versatile guy that can play slot or nickel corner and can drop deep into coverage. So with that being said, I mean, the difference makers they have, offense, defense, at the line of scrimmage, quarterback, just a question, kind of like Alabama and Ohio State, a few small question marks, but they're going to be really good. And, with high-end quarterback play, you got to believe that's probably one of the main ingredients that would put Georgia over the top to win another national title. But, yeah, I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Brant Parcell Show. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.